Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a US political update where I'm going to talk to you about a pretty controversial topic, an explosion in the far right of the United States political scene, where we have had Tucker Carlson, who is already pretty controversial, big fan of Russia, big fan of, it seems, I think, white supremacy to some degree, at the very least, and is also kind of anti-Israel, to be honest. And he's just platformed, he's just interviewed a chap called Nick Fuentes, who is incredibly controversial. I've talked to you about Nick Fuentes before. I've talked to you about, so before I go on to talk to you about exactly who he is, let's just talk about the Overton window. So the Overton window is this window of what's acceptable to talk about. And we talk about it moving throughout time. So now it seems that, oh, this thing is now acceptable to talk about, whereas it wasn't 20 years ago. What's happened there? This window has moved. I don't think it often moves. I think it expands. I think it's better to understand the Overton window. It's expanding. And now just everything appears to have been normalized. We're okay with talking about white supremacy. We're okay with talking about, I don't know, overt anti-Semitism, even if it's like, oh, I disagree with that, but I will allow you to hold that opinion and be on this panel show or interview. I'm going to interview you, and we're just normalizing this discussion with someone who holds really egregious views in a way that would never have happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago, etc., etc. And the problem here, you might think, well, it's freedom of speech, that's okay, but actually there's a problem there. And the problem is, I think, best understood when we talk about the psychological concept of the mere exposure effect, which is merely exposing people, particularly over and over, to whatever ideas they are, will make them, one, normalized, two, more credible, and then three, more attractive. So you normalize them. It's okay to speak about this, and then the more you talk about them, the more credible, the more believable they become. Oh yeah, okay, well, I can see. And then, oh no, you're quite like, the more attractive they are. Oh no, yeah, I do like that. So the more, and this is how advertising works. Literally, it's the foundation of advertising. So the more you allow people to speak about really egregious topics in ways where they're trying to justify them, you aren't just, oh, we're just allowing freedom of speech, this is really good for a healthy society. Actually, no, I'd say those are the kind of uncomfortable conversations you have down a pub or in particular niche areas. But you start allowing that in the mainstream, and actually you are going to allow a large segment of your society to be sucked into this very divisive, very problematic worldview. And I think you are setting yourselves up on a national societal level for a fall here. I mean, this is very dangerous. And people like, well, I would say Tucker Carlson himself have been platformed for far too long. I think, he was kicked off Fox News, but mainly because he slagged off the Fox News directors, board of directors, in these emails that were got hold of. But really, he should have been kicked out before that. And now Elon Musk is allowing him to platforming him on X by giving him a show where he just expresses all sorts of egregious opinions. And now he's got Nick Fuentes on, and that doesn't surprise me at all. But you've had this eruption on the right, which is fascinating to watch. And I'm going to just do a little bit of an explanation of this. So here's a Washington Post saying Tucker Carlson's interview with white nationalist triggers a GOP backlash. There's this backlash within the right at the moment, within the Republican Party, because Nick Fuentes should be a kind of no-go area, and now you've kind of brought him in and you've interviewed him, and then because Tucker Carlson is associated with the Heritage Foundation, very much so, and CPAC, which is run by the Heritage Foundation, this conservative conference, Tucker Carlson is a big part of that. The Heritage Foundation have come out and supported Tucker Carlson in interviewing Nick Fuentes. Now, the Heritage Foundation is the White House. The authors of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 handbook for the blueprint for his administration this time round, all of those authors pretty much are now either secretaries or important members of the Trump administration in the White House. So the Heritage Foundation is the White House. They are running the country. So when the Heritage Foundation comes out and defends Tucker Carlson for interviewing a white supremacist, that is essentially the Trump White House defending Tucker Carlson and therefore, by extension, defending Nick Fuentes. And there's no surprise that Stephen Miller is one of the key players in the White House, heavily involved with Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation. And you've got this situation. And now you have other members of the far right and the regular GOP, the regular Republicans, going, hang on, what are we doing platforming anti-Semites? Because we get a lot of money, lobbying money coming from Israel, and we are generally supportive of Israel. What's going on here? So then you get to this like fascinating, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit, not too much about theology, but I'm going to bring it in a little bit because it's really, really important to understand this. So on the far right, essentially, or really on the right in America particularly, but very many places, Britain's the same, right? Islam is the bogeyman, right? They're the bad guys. Muslims are the bad guys because of, 9/11, war on terror. Islam was put in the crosshairs. So your bad guys are Muslims. And so therefore, when there is a war in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine, Israel and Gaza, Israel and Hamas, and Hamas represents all of these people, right? Women, children, unborn, old people, they're all Hamas, right? It's the idea that actually, we need to be supporting Israel against the Muslims here because they are a threat to our Judeo-Christian way of life. And the important thing to understand there is Judeo-Christian, which is to say that for many people, but not all, we're going to talk about this, for many people on the Christian right in America, they would see themselves as being part of the Judeo-Christian world. So Steve Bannon talks often about that, about, morality and culture comes from the Judeo-Christian basis for Western societies. And so Israel is not just a country that is fighting Islam in the Middle East, but is actually the homeland for our religion, right, they would say. And when we look at Christianity, we see that actually, Jesus was a Jew originally, and Christianity was born out of Judaism. It was a sect of Judaism, and we can talk about, how there's an evolution of thinking from, say, the Gospel of Mark, the earliest gospel at, say, I don't know, let's say 55 CE, or you can contest this, but say 55 CE, so 20, 30 years after Jesus died, if that indeed happened, and blah, 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 lots of debate. You can go and read all my books on this. I would say the Gospel of Mark, the writer didn't, and therefore the community in which he was writing didn't believe Jesus was God, right? So they and he thought Jesus was a Messiah. It's really, really important to understand this distinction here and actually see the evolution through Mark, then Matthew, then Luke, and then eventually John. So the Gospel of John, written in maybe 105 CE, was a gospel that had a lot longer for the communities, these growing nascent Christian communities, to think about what their beliefs were and to develop something called high Christology, which is this idea that actually Jesus was the Christ, was God in human form. And then they're like, how does that work? Well, we have to have something along the lines of the Holy Trinity, and then that doesn't really work, but we'll just say it works anyway, and we'll believe in Mysterianism, whereas I don't know how it works, we just know that it does work. And they developed this idea that actually this guy was God. Now, why I'm telling you all this is really super important to understand this for this political discussion, because arguably there is a form of anti-Semitism that comes out of Christianity, and it has done for an awful long time. And this is why within Christian cultures and societies and nations, or before nations, whatever states we had, Jewish diaspora communities weren't always very well accepted, because actually there's this element that the Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus, which is deicide, right? So once you develop this idea that Jesus is God, then you say, well, how did God die? Well, actually, he was crucified. Well, who by? Pontius Pilate? Well, not really. Actually, he offered a bit of salvation for Jesus, but they opted for Jesus rather than Barabbas. And the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, wanted Jesus to be crucified, and the people then said he should be killed. And so when you look back, you can blame the Jews for the death of Jesus. So it can be thought. So And this is what I'm telling you is not controversial at all. This is all fairly well established within kind of theological discourse. For example, here we've got Jesuit Review here saying the Gospel of John has been used to justify anti-Semitism. So we should stop reading it on Good Friday. So this is the idea that, there is, particularly in the Gospel of John, but actually elsewhere. So there's even a Wikipedia page for anti-Semitism and the New Testament. And you can see, all these different kind of manifestations of what could be seen as anti-Semitism throughout the Gospels, from the Gospel of Mark through Matthew, and then into John here. But particularly John is often seen as one of the more problematic Gospels in terms of anti-Semitism and blaming the Jews for the death of Jesus. Okay, so why is that important? Because it actually then you can start understanding why there might be this fracture within the far right sphere in US politics, whereby you've got certain people are like, okay, Muslims are bad guys, Judeo-Christianity and Judaism is part of my Christian identity because I understand it is Judeo-Christianity. But then you get other evangelical Christians who will go, actually, no, I'm not a Christian. So other people can be seen as Christian Zionists, which would be like, we need to support Israel. We need to give funding towards Israel in fighting wars against Muslims in the surrounding area, and yeah, as a Christian, I'm firmly in support of Zion and Zionism. And other evangelical Christians are like, no, the Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus, and screw you guys. No, in fact, we are going to be anti-Semitic, and that's kind of where Nick Fuentes is, and it's kind of where I think Tucker Carlson is, right? But the regular GOP and most MAGA, but actually I think there's probably a bit of a split in MAGA, but certainly the traditional Republican Party are going to be much more Christian Zionist, which is, yeah, we're fully behind a Christian identity, but in support of Israel, and we are happily take lobbying and funding from AIPAC and from Israel itself, etc., etc. Okay, so I think you've got these two things going on, and this is a fracture that I think is being expressed here through this interview with Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. But we have actually seen similar issues over time. So Charlie Kirk was assassinated recently, and when he was assassinated, in fact, if you look at the Nick Fuentes thing here, his Wikipedia page, there is a section on, I think, Groyper, the Groyper War and the Groyper War 2. Groyper War 2 here. So Groypers are supporters of Nick Fuentes. So sorry, here it is on the Wikipedia page for Nick Fuentes. So Groypers, if you remember, I when I was reporting on the assassination of Charlie Kirk, it was immediately thought that the person that did it must be like a liberal, because who else would want to kill a right-wing ideologue? But then there was this theory that I actually thought was pretty plausible, that the guy that was involved in killing Charlie Kirk might have been a Groyper, because Nick Fuentes has these supporters who are often seen as Groypers, who sit further to the right than Charlie Kirk. And Charlie Kirk was a very conservative Christian Republican sitting to the right of the spectrum. But even further right were these people who had previously attacked Charlie Kirk. So Nick Fuentes had this to do with Charlie Kirk in public, a public spat, and they'd had this Groyper war. And so it's thought that because Charlie Kirk wasn't right-wing enough, right? And it was to do with Zionism, and it was largely to do with the support of Israel and whatnot. And so Nick Fuentes, as far as I understand it, was criticizing Charlie Kirk for being too supportive of Israel, and therefore his peeps loaded onto Charlie Kirk's peeps, and that's why it was thought that actually the person who shot Charlie Kirk might have been a member of this community who sat even further to the right. So there is, a similar line of controversy that we have already witnessed on the right here. It's also worth noting that Nick Fuentes and the controversy with Nick Fuentes hasn't come out of nowhere. So during Trump 1.0, it might have even been before his inauguration, Trump 1.0, he had dinner with Nick Fuentes. And there was a lot of controversy around that because people were saying, why are you having dinner with a white nationalist? This is absolutely unacceptable. As you can see from this, Donald Trump dined with white nationalist Holocaust denier Nick Fuentes. The former president hosted Fuentes and Kanye West, who was going through his pro-Hitler, or probably still is in that. I mean, Kanye West, as a black rapper, was like pro-Hitler, anti-Semite as well. I find it pretty striking that the Heritage Foundation defends Tucker Carlson for interviewing Nick Fuentes is a bigger news story and is resulting in more soul-searching and division on the right than once and future President Donald Trump invites Nick Fuentes to private dinner. But when you understand that Stephen Miller is so close to the president, then that can make a little more sense. When we look at who Nick Fuentes is, in terms of his political views here, the Wikipedia entry has him, has a big section on white nationalism. That's pretty obvious from what he says consistently. Even Catholic nationalism, obvious anti-Semitism. He's praised Adolf Hitler. He's denied the Holocaust. He holds really obvious anti-Semitic views that he doesn't hold back on. He's Islamophobic, and his foreign policy, I mean, this is a worry for many of you who might be watching this channel because of support for Ukraine. Fuentes' foreign policy views praise authoritarian regimes and movements that oppose US influence. So on March 10th, 2022, Fuentes praised Putin for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which he claimed was to liberate Ukraine from the great Satan and from the evil empire in the world, which is the United States. The AFPAC event in 2022, led by Fuentes, was marked by support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. One expert on the far right stated, quote, the common thread in it is this idea that because of Western European and US influence on Ukraine, Ukraine was a place where the same perceived downfalls of Western society existed. During his speech, Fuentes praised Hitler and said that the media had been comparing Vladimir Putin to Hitler as if that wasn't a good thing. That was his quote. Fuentes also asked the audience, quote, can we get a round of applause for Russia? Which was followed by roaring applause and chants of Putin, Putin after the conference. Fuentes led a prayer for Russia's forces in Ukraine. He also ridiculed Kamala Harris for claiming that Russia was committing war crimes. Fuentes spread lies about the death counts and Russia's motivations for the war. So massive fan of, and that's where that you're going to see a connection between him and Tucker Carlson, because Tucker Carlson pretty much believes similar things there. COVID-19 conspiracy theories, misogyny and reproductive rights issues, opposition to JD Vance, anti-LGBT, and just personally, he describes himself as a proud incel, which is an involuntary celibate man. He has expressed, I think usually man, he has expressed interest in marrying a 16-year-old, describing this age as, quote, right when the milk is good. Fuentes has said that the only real straight heterosexual position is to be an asexual incel. That's a quote. As, quote, having sex with women is gay, which is a weird thing. He's famously said that. Okay, that's Nick Fuentes. He then has this interview with Tucker Carlson, and The Atlantic writes, the gap between white supremacist influencer Nick Fuentes and the rest of the right is narrower than it has ever been. Tucker Carlson opens the door to Nick Fuentes, or for him. This is a really, really good point. So this is about that Overton window being expanded. Now it's acceptable for Nick Fuentes to be inside the same room as the people on the right. He's been welcomed in. We can talk to him. We can talk about him. We can discuss all of these ideologies, and we shouldn't shun these ideas. And therefore it becomes acceptable. It becomes normalized. It becomes more credible, and then it becomes more acceptable and more attractive. And you've got a problem. Honestly, this doesn't end well. Now, Ben Lorber here says, look, as I guessed last week, Tucker Carlson's interview with Nick Fuentes dropped tonight after 5+ years of pushing the Overton window, expanding the Overton window. Fuentes is no longer untouchable. So if you're going to take anything from this video, it's this. Fuentes is no longer untouchable. He's in the mainstream. He's in the room now. On the biggest MAGA platform, open, unabashed Hitlerism is no longer too far. So he is a Hitlerite, right? So he's praises Hitler, which means he's praising the gassing of 6 million Jews, right? And that is now acceptable for these people to be mainstreamed, to be platformed. Elon Musk is fine with that. Tucker Carlson is fine with that. I think Tucker Carlson thinks the same personally, or pretty similarly, I would imagine. So even though Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes had their own spat where I think Fuentes call Tucker Carlson gay or something like that. Anyway, you know, proper school ground stuff, playground stuff. Okay, so let's go. And no, before we go there, actually, before we go to the outright misogyny, let's just establish a little bit more that he really has said some egregious things about Jews. So this is concerning Jews, what he's talking about. So when he's talking about they, it's essentially yeah, it's about witchcraft, it's about atheists, and it's about perfidious Jews.
There is an occult element at the high levels of society, and specifically among the Jews. So many of the people that are perpetrating the lies and the destruction on the country, they are evildoers. They are people that worship false gods. They are people that practice magic or rituals or whatever. And more than anything, those people need to be, when we take power, they need to be given the death penalty.
So when we take power, they need to be given the death penalty. He later talks about them being annihilated. So he is advocating for the death of...
Straight up. And I'm far more concerned about that than I am about even non-white people or mass migration. These people that are communing with demons and engaging in this sort of witchcraft and stuff, and these people that are suppressing the name Christ.
These people who are suppressing the name Christ, or anyone who is essentially like Islamic, Jewish, non-Christian,
and suppressing Christianity, they must be absolutely annihilated when we take power. This is God's country. This is Jesus's country. This is not the domain of atheists or devil worshippers or perfidious Jews. This is Christ's country.
So perfidious Jews and atheists, people like me, we should be advised living in America. And if he took control, I would be given the death penalty. Just, you know, yeah. Here he is talking about American Jews.
It's the malevolent, malicious lying, the backstabbing, dual loyalty, the way they have this agenda, which they think is secret, it so isn't. The way they have this agenda, they're working on behalf of Israel. They think nobody knows that. They want everybody to believe they're not. It's so obvious. It's wrong. It's wrong. This is America. You love America. This is your only allegiance. This is your country. These are your people. And that's how it is. Or else you can find another host to leech off of.
I mean, wow, that's some pretty powerful language there. I'd say you love a country by criticizing it. I love this place, but we just want it to be even better. You know, I think just otherwise you are just ripe for, well, I mean, he's an authoritarian, clearly. So, you know, if you don't pay complete allegiance to and loyalty to whatever, then hey, death penalty.
That's how it is. And by the way, this is a welcoming country. This is a decent country. This is a loving country. To its detriment, this is an altruistic and tolerant country. If you have Americans pissed off at you, you have done something wrong. Americans are not bad people. They're not hateful. They're not old world. They don't have those ancient prejudices. I didn't. I don't. But they have taken for granted the hospitality of this nation. That's what it is. Don't feel like I'm not the bad guy. You're not the bad guy. This is righteous indignation. We are being taken advantage of. This nation opened its arms wide for all different kinds of people. Like I said, and I don't even know if that's a good thing, but it did. Because that's just who Americans are. And they have abused the good faith and the goodwill of the American people. That's what that is. When you look at these evangelical Protestants in the South, They earnestly and sincerely love Israel, and the Israelis fucking hate them. Hate them. These evangelicals, they go to church and they weep and they cry and they tithe. And they earnestly support Israel. And when they go on pilgrimages to Israel, they get spit on. They get attacked. You look at opinion polls, the Israelis hate them. They look at them with contempt and disdain. That's wrong. That's being taken advantage of. That's abuse. That's not right. You wouldn't, and no American would deign to go into any other country. We wouldn't go into China and say, well, we're in charge here and you better care about our shit and we run everything and you all have to accommodate us. You wouldn't even think of that. That's how they are here. And it's wrong and it's got to stop. And Americans have to stand up for themselves.
So that's where he's at. That's the kind of anti-Semitic stuff that he says, and you know, denying the Holocaust and praising Hitler, all that kind of carry on. Very misogynistic as well. This was in the interview with Tucker Carlson. Yeah, and I think that you have to love your wife as your wife. A lot of men, says Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, as opposed to what? Your mum? Nick Fuentes says, well, no, like your buddy, because I hear this all the time and I hate this. Guys will say, I married my best friend. And I think, you know, she's your wife. She's not your best friend because there's a difference. What is the difference? Nick Fuentes says, I think that when you talk about your best friend, you're a peer, you're an equal. And I think your best friendships are with other men. And I think that your wife ultimately is subordinate to you. She's your helpmate. And ultimately, as the man in the marriage and as the father, you have authority and final say over the household. And she can give advice. It's not to say I'm not a freak, where you say, shut up, woman. I mean, of course, you discuss things with your wife and your wife gives input, but the authority rests with the man. Tucker Carlson says, of course, but God set up this kind of amazing system where men are physically stronger. So, of course, you can make your wife do whatever you wanted. You're bigger than she is. So that's two guys having a nice, friendly conversation about women there. Here is Nick Fuentes.
I'm not surprised why women don't support me. Women are irrational and sensitive. It's just like my whole life. Because I was always like the class clown. I was always like bullying women. And women have always been like simultaneously charmed, but also like, oh, stop it. Oh, you're so annoying. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. That's how women are with like with like my personality type, where you're like a rascal, you know, you're like
you're a dick, mate.
You're like a bastard. And they're kind of like, because I'm like a rule breaker and stuff.
Ooh. And
so women simultaneously are intrigued by that, but they also have to pretend like they're not, because women, it's sort of like how a lot of women want to be raped. And when I say raped, I mean like, that sounds bad when I say it like that. But there's like a lot of women that really want a guy to beat the shit out of them. But also they have to pretend, but part of it is they have to pretend like they don't.
So anyway, that's Nick Fuentes. So he's then talking to Tucker Carlson here. Tucker Carlson explaining to Holocaust denying white supremacist Nick Fuentes why the people he hates most are Ted Cruz, me, says Jason Hart, and everyone else who believes that what the Bible says about Israel. So this is an attack on Christian Zionism. So this is why it was important for me to explain the kind of some theological basis for what's going on here, because this is an anti-Semitic position from one of Christian fundamentalism.
How do you explain Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz, and there are a lot like that, John Bolton? I mean, I've known them all, George W. Bush, like Karl Rove. I mean, all people I know personally who I've seen like be seized by this brain virus, and they're not Jewish. Most of them are self-described Christians, and then the Christian Zionists who are, well, Christian Zionists. Like, what is that?
Right.
And I could just say for myself, I dislike them more than anybody, because like, what?
So here you've got Tucker Carlson saying, I dislike more than anybody. If we're going to take him in his word, the worst people on earth aren't atheists, aren't Muslims, aren't this, aren't that, aren't, criminals, the most disgusting in society. They are Christian Zionists. And that's pretty interesting.
Because it's Christian heresy, and I'm offended by that as a Christian. That's why. So I don't, why not? I'm pissed at the neocons, very pissed. I've said that a million times. I've been mad since December of 2003 when I went to Iraq. And so I went and asked straightforward questions to Ted Cruz, because that seemed like there's a sitting senator who's serving for Israel by his own description. He seemed like a worthy target. I'm not going after MTG, who's the most sincere why not go after Ted Cruz? I don't understand.
Okay, so remember there was a beef between Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz as he interviewed Ted Cruz some time back, and it started up being a bit of an argument over Christianity and whatnot. But yeah, and then there's this from Nick Fuentes.
So it was mid-December, late December. It's actually funny. It was December 18th. I remember because that's an important date to me. And it's Joseph Stalin's birthday.
Oh,
I'm a fan.
You're a fan of Stalin's?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was an admirer, but we don't need to go into that. I guess.
Well, that's okay. Let's get back. We'll circle back to that.
It was weird because
it's interesting. We'll circle back to that. So you've got a lot of commonality between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, but then Nick Fuentes will say something that even Tucker Carlson's that's too crazy for me, because I'm always saying I'm against communism. I can do that from a position of kind of pro-Hitler fascism, you might say. But if you're saying you're a fan of Stalin, what's going on then? Of course, it's more likely to be to do with authoritarianism and mass killing of people he doesn't like.
The reason I mentioned that, it was almost because I woke up that day and I was like, oh, it's December 18th. And I was just very acutely aware of today's a strange day. This is the day that the attempt happened. So it was mid.
Okay. And then we have the reaction from the GOP, from Republicans in general, but also from particular ones like the Heritage Foundation. So Mitch McConnell, who's a former majority speaker and minority speaker for the Senate, said, the intellectual backbone of the conservative movement is only as strong as the values it defends. Last I checked, conservatives should feel no obligation to carry water for anti-Semites and apologists for America-hating autocrats. But maybe I just don't know what time it is. So, wow. And what he's doing is he's reacting to Kevin Roberts and what he said, which we'll come to in a second. So Ron Filikowski from the Midas Touch Network says Mitch goes after the Heritage Foundation director after he issues a video defending Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson's recent platforming of racists and various psychotic conspiracies. Here we have M.A. Rothman saying Ted Cruz just nuked the conservative bluff. Okay, we're going to actually listen to Ted Cruz. So this is Ted Cruz's response, which is a kind of, I guess, should be the standard Republican response, really. Sound isn't brilliant here, but listen up.
And now is a time for choosing. Now is a time for courage.
He's speaking at the Republican Jewish Coalition here, by the way.
If you sit there and nod adoringly while someone tells you that Winston Churchill was the villain of World War II. Yeah. If you sit there and nod while someone says there's a very good argument America should have intervened on behalf of Nazi Germany in World War II. If you sit there with someone who says Adolf Hitler was very, very cool, and that their mission is to combat and defeat global Jewry, and you say nothing, then you are a coward and you are complicit in that
evil. And I wouldn't disagree with that at all. And that should be the standard response from Republicans, from the GOP, but there are people who have their allegiances torn right? Jim Stewartson says Opus Dei, which motivates Kevin Roberts' rage. So the idea is that Kevin Roberts had the Heritage Foundation is part of Opus Dei, which is that Catholic extreme organization. So I don't know about that, but which motivates Kevin Roberts' rage, he must be, against government and liberalism is an outgrowth of the Franco dictatorship. His alignment with Tucker Carlson and his footsie with Nick Fuentes is a perfect example of how immoral this movement is. If evil exists, this is it. Okay, so a watershed moment, says Yasha Ali. The president of the Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action, Kevin Roberts, has announced that the organization is standing by Tucker Carlson in the aftermath of Tucker's interview of neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes. This isn't Kevin bending the knee to Trump. This is something new. In his statement, Kevin condemns what he calls venomous coalition that is sowing division by attacking Tucker. That venomous coalition includes MAGA Republicans as well as Jewish conservative commentators, activists, and donors. Kevin also frames Nick Fuentes' rhetoric as worthy of debate rather than something to be condemned outright. A shift like this would have been unthinkable for Heritage just 3 years ago. So this is Kevin Roberts' response.
I'll have more to say on this in the coming days, but today I want to be clear about one thing. Christians can critique the state of Israel without being anti-Semitic. And of course, anti-Semitism should be condemned.
Now, that is correct. And I think there is a problem with not being able to criticize Israel as a nation and what they do. They often get a free pass for things because criticisms get accused, people, critics of Israel as a nation get accused of being anti-Semitic. Well, it's just I'm not anti like French if I criticize something that's going on in France at the moment. It's just I'm criticizing the nation, not all the people or indeed a religious belief system that might underwrite the culture of that nation state. So there is certainly an element of truth to that.
My loyalty as a Christian and as an American is to Christ first and to America always. When it serves the interests of the United States to cooperate with Israel and other allies, we should do so with partnerships on security, intelligence, and technology. But when it doesn't, conservatives should feel no obligation to reflexively support any foreign government, no matter how loud the pressure becomes from the globalist class or from their mouthpieces in Washington. The Heritage Foundation didn't become the intellectual backbone of the conservative movement by canceling our own people or policing the consciences of Christians. And we won't start doing that now.
So it's like, well, we're not gonna deplatform these people. We're not gonna, cancel these people. No, but you're not canceling Nick Fuentes by not having an interview with him. Like if I decide not to have an interview with Boris Johnson tomorrow, which I'm not going to have, he's not getting cancelled. It's not cancelling him. It's just Jonathan Pearce doesn't have an interview with Boris Johnson. Well, whoop-de-doo. But if you are going to support Tucker Carlson, who is affiliated with the Heritage Foundation, platforming Nick Fuentes, then you are platforming anti-Semitism. It is that simple.
We don't take direction from comments on X, though we are grateful for the robust free speech debate. We also don't take direction from members or donors, though we are inherently grateful for their support. And we're adding more every day. This is the robust debate we invite with our colleagues, our movement friends, our members, and the American public. We will always defend truth. We will always defend America, and we will always defend our friends against the slander of bad actors who serve someone else's agenda. That includes Tucker Carlson, who remains, and as I have said before, always will be a close friend of the Heritage Foundation. The venomous coalition attacking him are sowing division.
So now he's calling, like, I assume either Republicans or who are not a fan of what Tucker Carlson said, but particularly Jewish Republicans or Jewish donors, a venomous coalition, which I find quite a broadside there.
Their attempt to cancel him will fail. Most importantly, the American people expect us to be focusing on our political adversaries on the left, not attacking our friends on the right. I disagree with, and even abhor, things that Nick Fuentes says. But canceling him is not the answer either. When we disagree with a person's thoughts and opinions.
But here's the problem. Tucker Carlson didn't disagree with anything. He platformed him. This wasn't like we need to be hoisted by his own petard. This is my approach to freedom of speech, which is, yeah, you're entitled to that opinion if you can justify it. And actually, part of that justification process is me criticizing what you say big time. And that's why, you know, it's not platforming your opinions. It's actually allowing you to voice them so I can critique them. That's not what Tucker Carlson did. He sat there and when your man Nick Fuentes said, oh, you know, I'm a big fan of Stalin, all Tucker Carlson said was, oh, really? Oh, we'll circle back to that. And he never did. So you didn't challenge him on even that. So it appears that Nick Fuentes can say pretty much whatever he likes. So this argument here from Kevin Roberts just is simply ill thought through, in my opinion.
The venomous coalition attacking him are sowing division. Their attempt to cancel him will fail. Most importantly, the American people expect us to be focusing on our political adversaries on the left, not attacking our friends on the right. I disagree with, and even abhor, things that Nick Fuentes says. But canceling him is not the answer either. When we disagree with a person's thoughts and opinions, we challenge those ideas in debate.
You didn't.
And we have seen success in this approach
as
we continue to dismantle the vile ideas of the left.
So then it's just bait and switch, isn't it? It's like, oh, you know, the best way to deal with the horrible, I abhor some of the things he said, well, horrible. The best way to deal with them is to challenge him. Oh, but we didn't do that, but we should be challenging the vile left. Oh, right. Okay. So that's really what this is about. And he says, like, why are we attacking each other? Let's all be friends, even if you are despicable. By the way, you're not despicable. I really like you. Let's hug. But anyway, in public, I can't say that we're going to hug because everyone else in the world thinks that that's pretty despicable. So I better say it publicly. But anyway, let's not fight. Please, let's not fight. Can we be friends? Because let's face it, these horrible, the evil, vile people on the left, you know, who want dignity for all. Those people, yeah, bastards.
As my friend Vice President Vance said last night, what I am not okay with is any country coming before the interest of American citizens, and it is important for all of us, assuming we are American citizens, to put the interest of our own country first. That's where our allegiance lies, and that's where it will stay.
So blind loyalty to the country without defining what that is, just blind allegiance to the country and, you know, not actually holding people to account in a way that you kind of implied should be done. No holding people to account and no criticism of anything really that's anything to do with the United States or the right. But if it's, I don't know, Jews, not American, non-Americans, the left. In fact, you know, half of America. Oh, we need allegiance to America, but half of America we can otherize. But it's all about, you know, it's not America for everyone. It's America for people like you, your little group of people. So it's so frustrating. So Tucker Carlson is not only on the Charlie Kirk speaking tour, he's top featured speaker next to the vice president. This guy and his Hitler-loving friend Nick Fuentes just mainstreamed hatred for Jews. When the next crop of young Republican texts come out praising Hitler, you'll know why. And of course, the context of this, further context of this interview is those leaked text messages between the young Republicans who are not really that young, up to sort of 34 or whatever age they were, who were spreading pro-Hitler, pro-white supremacy messages. This is the new world that we are living in, or certainly in the United States. This is all too acceptable now in the United States. And I'd say the same in the UK with the Unite the Kingdom rally and some of the views that were coming out there. I think this is happening in the UK as well, and many other places in Europe. It's a really worrying period of world history, given World War II. I think essentially our living memory of World War II is now, you know, for the young men in society particularly, but young women as well. You look at Naomi Zeit, the German fascist woman who's just sought and I think had accepted political asylum in the United States. She's now seen pictured on a shooting range there. Just like the US seems to be embracing the far right in really obvious, overt ways, and it's not just the US. Worryingly, this is really concerning. But it's a fascinating fracture in the far right there when you understand that, you know, you've got some of these people are really like Christian Zionists, want to do everything they can to support essentially what could be seen as genocide in Palestine, supporting Israel, killing many people over there. And then you have other members of the far right saying, no, we don't need to support Israel because they are all Zionists and we're actually anti-Zionists and we're anti-Semites, and we're happy to admit that in public and claim our adoration of Adolf Hitler and indeed Joseph Stalin. It's just crazy. It's nuts, bonkers. But it's becoming more acceptable. That Overton window has expanded. Worrying times. Let me know what you think, and hopefully I've, you know, made you think a little bit about maybe other aspects of this this fracas that maybe you hadn't thought about, maybe some of the religious aspects. But yeah, let me know what you think in the thread below. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.